All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Bank. I'm the product lead for Gmail, and I'm going to be presenting along with Ian Leader, who's here in the front row. He's the product lead for Google Calendar, and we're going to be talking about time. We're going to do a little hero-villain routine. I'm going to be the villain that's going to utterly depress all of us by explaining a bunch of reasons why we're terrible at managing our time and how hopeless the situation is. And then Ian's going to be the hero who comes, saves us, and tells us about all the features we're building in Gmail Calendar that are trying to take these behavioral flaws and mistakes into account in the way we design products to help people spend their time as well as they can. So we'll start with an obligatory groan-inducing cliche, time is precious, but as we all collectively roll our eyes, it's worth spending a moment to think about why time is actually pretty unique as a resource and why it's particularly difficult to manage because of these unique properties. You can't really save it. You can't really make more of it unless you eat like a barrel of kale every day. All you can do is spend it as wisely as possible. Once it's spent, it's gone. And so an exercise that I go through about once a month that I'd recommend all of you go through, if not now in real time, maybe after the session ends over lunch, think about the 3 most important things you want to accomplish this year. Then look back at your calendar for the last week, 2 weeks, and try to figure out how much time you actually spent on those 3 most important things. If you're anything like me, it'll be a terrifyingly small amount of time that you've spent on the 3 things that are actually important to you, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life. And more generally, you can do a more general exercise where you draw a pie chart of where your time is going now and a pie chart of where you'd like your time to go, and there'll probably be a scary mismatch between those 2. And it's not just us, it's actually been studied a bunch. McKinsey did a study a few years ago where they interviewed a bunch of executives and asked them how satisfied they were with the way they managed their time. Only 9% said that they were very satisfied with the way that they managed their time. And only 52% said that the way they spent their time largely matched their organization's strategic priorities. So while we spend hours and hours haggling about, do we launch this feature or that feature? Can we save a penny here? Can we save a nickel there? We're maybe missing out on an opportunity to save half of the time that we're currently not putting towards our strategic priorities and line it up better with our goals. So where does that time actually go? McKinsey did another study a couple years ago on how a typical knowledge worker spends their day. And here are the results. For the average knowledge worker, about 28% of their time reading and answering email alone. It's almost 3 hours in a typical 40-hour work week. 19% of their time searching and gathering information, 14% collaborating internally, meetings, and 39% on role-specific tasks, aka the real work that these people were all hired to do. Only 39% of their time spent on real work. So what we're going to do in this talk, my portion of the talk, I'm going to go through a bunch of mistakes that people make in dealing with their email and in dealing with their schedules, and cite some research from behavioral psychology and behavioral economics that helps to explain why our brains are wired to be bad at using these tools to make decisions about how we spend our time. Start with email. The first and probably most debilitating flaw we face in dealing with our email is that it's a constant source of interruption. A typical knowledge worker gets about 120 emails a day. But what does that cost in terms of interruption? Like maybe I just check my phone quickly, put it back in my pocket, no harm done. Turns out there's actually been a research group that spent years studying specifically email interruptions in the workplace and what the cost of those interruptions is. And what they found is that when you actually open your email client from doing a creative task like writing a paper or preparing a presentation, the average cost of that interruption is 25 minutes. It's a pretty striking number, and it's going to sound crazy, but if you actually think through some of these scenarios, it'll probably start to resonate. So you get a notification on your phone, you're like, oh crap, that's my boss, I got to reply to that. You open up your email client, you realize that they're asking for some number that you don't have off the top of your head. You go to some dashboard, you find the number, you compose a well-crafted email, you fire it off to your boss. By that time, another email has come in that you need to reply to. Repeat the same routine again. Then someone sent you like a video of a dog skateboarding down a Christmas tree. You got to go watch that. And then in a moment of panic, you realize that you actually need to go back to writing your paper, preparing your presentation, whatever the important creative task is that you were doing. by that point, you've forgotten what slide you were working on or what paragraph you were writing and what your train of thought was, and you have to reestablish all of that mental state before you can continue to be creative, and you get a number that's kind of like 25 minutes. So these interruptions are extremely costly because we get distracted very easily. Second flaw, procrastination. This is one we've all heard, experienced. It's talked about a lot. Usually people's mental model of procrastination is like a college student stays up all night eating pizza and playing video games instead of working on their term paper, but there are actually much more subtle and devious forms of procrastination that plague us throughout the workday, and that's typically when we do easy things that make us feel productive and give us a quick win, but aren't actually contributing to our long-term productivity or strategic goals. And a lot of this happens in email. It's a lot easier and feels a lot more productive to read a mailing list, reply to an email, chime in on a thread that totally doesn't need our opinion, rather than doing the hard work of producing a document or a presentation or the kind of creative work that taxes our cognitive capacity. We just can't resist an easy win. And as a result, we don't spend nearly enough time on the hard but important stuff. Third, anyone heard of Eisenhower's Matrix? The Eisenhower Matrix? It's like you make a 2x2 grid and you put urgency on one axis and importance on the other axis. And clearly stuff that's both urgent and important, you should do all that stuff first. Clearly stuff that's neither important nor urgent, you should never do. And then the buckets where people make a lot of mistakes are they do things that are urgent but not important over things that are important but not urgent. And in the case of email, similar to the procrastination example, a lot of emails, we've probably all seen emails that have a subject line like urgent, please read, urgent, action required. Depends how we define urgency, but how many of those are actually urgent? Like if you don't reply this second, the world is going to explode? Probably not many of them. And so that same research group that I mentioned that's done a lot of work on email interruption has also studied email batching behavior. And it turns out that if you do fewer sessions in email a day, like 3 long sessions where you deal with all of your email, instead of 50 short sessions where you deal with only 1 email at a time, you're both more productive and less stressed. But again, it's very hard for us to resist that urgent, please read, urgent, please reply, even when it's not actually urgent. And we should be doing our important work instead. Fourth, our inability to say no. How many of us have ever received an email where someone else is asking us to do something? Probably all of us. Probably you all have like 10 in your inbox right now. Saying no is really hard because social conventions dictate that we need to come up with a really, really good excuse that makes us and the requester feel comfortable about the rejection of their request. And the cognitive load of making these excuses is so high that we often think, I might as well just do the thing rather than making the excuse. But rarely is that actually the smart choice in terms of time management and prioritization. And because of this social convention that makes it very hard for us to say no, the result is that people set our priorities for us. Like a lot of people have said things like, an email is like a to-do list that other people write to. And it's true, largely because of this social convention that we feel obligated to not only act, but act quickly on what people ask us to do. Okay, we're halfway through. Number 5, Parkinson's Law. It's not actually a law, but it's the principle that I think we've all experienced, that work expands to fill the time allotted to it. And this is particularly true of meetings. So most calendaring systems default the meeting length to 1 hour. How many of you have ever been in a meeting scheduled for an hour that really only needed to happen for 20 minutes, but everyone, stretches out the time for the full hour anyway because you got the room booked, you got all the people in the room, might as well use it. But it turns out this is actually a huge waste of time. If you add up cumulatively all these hour-long meetings that really should have been half-hour meetings, and it's very hard to have the discipline to stop a meeting when it's done and not when the next person kicks you out of the meeting room. Number 6, the planning fallacy. This is an effect that was first discovered or first written about in 1979 by Tversky and Kahneman, the famous behavioral economists, and it refers to our systematic underestimation of how long things take. It turns out we apply an optimism bias whenever we're projecting how long it's going to take for a project to complete or for us to do even a simple individual task. And the reason for that is when we're making a projection on how long a project is going to take, we have this optimistic lens that everything is going to go smoothly the entire time, even though no project in the history of humanity has ever gone smoothly the entire time. It's just a different thing that goes wrong each time, so it's very hard to reason about. And how off we are depends a lot based on the circumstance, and there's a bunch of tricks you can use to try to be more accurate at estimating. But a good rule of thumb is that projects will take about double what we think they will. It's a good rule of thumb that's been proven across a variety of cases. And the really particularly depressing thing about the planning fallacy is that even if you tell someone right before they're about to make an estimation of how long something is going to take, that we are subject to this behavioral flaw, they're still going to underestimate how long it's going to take. Because again, they're not going to see all the little things that will go wrong that are abstracted away when you have an optimistic and rosy picture of what's going to happen. Related to the underestimation of how long things will take is the overestimation of how available we'll be in the future. So if I ask any one of you, can you spend 4 hours with me this afternoon meeting? You'll say, no way, that's crazy. I'm at a conference. I'm super busy. I've got a bunch of meetings to do. Can't possibly spend 4 hours with you. If I ask you, can you spend 4 hours with me over the week of July 20th? You'll look at your calendar and say, yeah, sure. I've got 4 weeks on the week of July 20th. Now, in reality, you're going to be just as busy the week of July 20th as you are now. You just don't know what the things are yet that you're going to be busy with. And the further we are in the future, the less and less concrete the other obligations that are vying for our time are, so the more we underestimate how busy we'll be. And that's how you end up doing things like 2 years from now, you commit to a 2-week-long workshop, and by the time you get there, you can't imagine how you ever would have committed to that because you clearly don't have enough time to do it. Last one, productive time. So our cognitive capacity varies throughout the day. And if you're like most people, you're at your most productive in the morning between roughly 8 a.m. and 11 a.m., usually like after you've had your first cup of coffee, before you get super hungry for lunch. And if you're like most people, if you're like me, that's when you're kind of rolling into the office, you're checking email, catching up on the news, easing your way into the day. And then after lunch, when we're all at our least productive, typically the post-lunch dip, 1 to 2 p.m., you realize you actually need to get your real work done and try to buckle down, but simply don't have the energy to do so. And that's because we do a very poor job of recognizing how our cognitive capacity changes throughout the day and how to align the cognitive capacity of our mental state with the cognitive capacity required by the tasks that we need to do. So we misuse our most precious hours pretty much every morning. So we add all this up, we get interrupted, we procrastinate, we do things that are urgent but not important, we can't say no, we waste a bunch of time in meetings that should have ended more quickly, we underestimate how long everything's going to take, we overestimate how much time we have, we misuse our most precious hours of the day. It's like not a shock that people think that 50% of their time is not going to their strategic priorities. And it's a bleak outlook, it's kind of a downer, it feels a little bit hopeless. But now I'll turn it over to Ian. And Ian's going to tell us about a bunch of the features that we're building in Google Calendar and into Gmail to take into account all of these behavioral principles that make us naturally bad at managing time, and hopefully we can make it better.
Thank you, Jacob. Okay, so let's talk solutions. The problems that Jacob described probably aren't new to a lot of you. There's hundreds of books, online articles, training courses about how to manage your time. But most of us are still doing a poor job, so clearly reading a book on productivity is not enough. So how do we solve this? The renowned behavioral economist Dan Ariely often says that one of the biggest lessons we've had from behavioral economics is that decisions we make are shaped by the environment that we're in. A great example of this is from outside the workplace's contribution to retirement plans like 401ks. There's a large body of research that shows that most people will only save enough during their working life if, by default, contributions to the plan out of their pay packet happen automatically. So we think that the best way to help people improve their time management behavior is to change the environment they're operating in. And that raises the question at work, which environment should we change to get the biggest benefit? And we think Gmail and Calendar are key, and that's not just because we work on them. To repeat the figures from McKinsey that Jacob mentioned earlier, the average knowledge worker is spending almost 3 hours a day in which environment? In their email client. And take calendar. So around 90% of the large companies that use G Suite today employee calendars are shared with the entire organization. That means anyone can look and see when you're available and schedule a meeting with you. This is a really powerful tool for collaboration, but it can have the unfortunate side effect that people start to manage your time for you. And as Jacob said, once that meeting invite arrives, we're not actually very good at saying no. So, first of all, I'm going to look at some of the tools that we already have in Gmail and Calendar that will help you, and then I'm going to talk about the future things we haven't released yet that we're thinking about as new ways to do this. Okay, so priority inbox. It's been around for a while. Many of you may have seen this. It was one of the early intelligence features that we put into Gmail back in 2010. And so priority inbox uses a variety of signals to work out which emails are likely important to you. And it shows these at the top separately from all the other emails. So what kind of signals? For example, we look at who you email to the most, because emails coming to you from those people are likely important to you. And we also look at which emails you read, which emails you open, which emails you reply to, and we consider emails similar to those more important than the kind of emails that you typically skip over. And so what all of that means is, when you open Gmail, you're looking at the important stuff with fewer distractions that can lead to procrastination. And there's also fewer interruptions, because you can set your phone to buzz only when it's one of these priority emails that are arriving, not the rest. And we have another tool in the product today that's also around elevating important emails, and that's tabbed inbox. And it's ideal if you want more control than priority inbox gives you about how your email is divided up, particularly if you subscribe to a lot of forums, or if you get a lot of updates from systems like workflow systems or project management systems. And tabbed inbox automatically categorizes the email. So there's forums like Google Groups, there's updates like an invoice coming in for your approval, and then there's the primary inbox, which is usually stuff from real people. And like priority inbox, this reduces distractions and makes it easier to batch up those email sessions into fewer, larger sessions. So changing tack slightly, one of the reasons people allow themselves to get distracted by non-urgent emails is because they keep them around in their inbox, because they're scared that if they don't, then they'll forget about them, and they'll drop the ball and they won't follow up. So we introduced the snooze feature, which will let you hide an email until a future time or until you're on a future location. And that gets it out of the way, but doesn't give you the cognitive load of having to remember to get back to it. Instead, we'll bump it to the top of your inbox when that time or place arrives, so you can't miss it. And snoozing is available in the inbox client, which alongside Gmail works well for a variety of different workflows, including the zero inbox approach. So let's take a look at calendar now. Jacob talked about the 1 hour meetings that don't really need to be 1 hour. So what if you just had shorter meetings? Well, when you start using Google Calendar in G Suite today, the default length for meetings is 1 hour. Maybe we should change that. But you can set it to anything you like. You can set it to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, what have you. Now, I'm not saying that you should make every meeting 10 minutes long, although it would be nice if that was actually possible. But by using the power of defaults, you can change the environment so that your default of, say, 15 minutes makes it less work to schedule a short meeting than it does to schedule a long meeting. So that's a pretty simple hack to help reduce your meeting load. But we've also been working on some more sort of complex problems and solutions. In particular, how can we help people spend more time focusing on long-term productive tasks, despite this tendency to become distracted and procrastinate? So let me quickly talk about a study that was published in the British Journal of Health Psychology a few years ago. And it was about how do you get people to exercise more frequently. So there were 3 groups of participants in this study. And the first group, in the control group, which is people in their natural state, just let them do what they want, around 38% of the participants did exercise at least once a week. And so the question is, how can we get more people to do exercise? So the first thing they did is they took, second group they called the motivation group, and they tried to motivate them. They gave them a brochure on why exercise is good for you. They talked to them about coronary heart disease and how terribly unpleasant this is and how exercise can actually help overcome this. And so you'd think that you would get a positive outcome from this, but guess what? You didn't. In fact, there was a slight drop in the number of participants in that group exercising at least once a week. However, there was a third group, the intention group. And in this group, the participants were asked to commit a day and a time when you will do your exercise next week and the week after and so on. And here the impact was massive. There we go. We actually saw that, in that study, they saw that 91% of participants were exercising at least once a week, and that's a 160% increase over the control. So when we think about this in a work context, what does it tell us? Like, being motivated is not on its own enough. You're all motivated, right? You all want to do a great job at work. You all want to have an impact. None of you want to get fired. But that on its own is not enough to overcome these cognitive failures that get in the way of how we spend our time well. However, scheduling can make a difference. The problem is, scheduling everything that you're going to do into your calendar is actually hard work. And so many people, even when they know about this, they don't do that extra work of scheduling. So what we decided to do was build a feature into the Google Calendar product called gills. And this is about taking the work out of scheduling time for these long-term goals. And we launched it almost a year ago. Basically, you tell Calendar what you want to do, how long you want to do it for, and how often you want to do it. And Calendar takes care of setting up the sessions by automatically blocking out time on your calendar. So how do we find good times for you to do this if all you're telling us is how frequently you want to exercise or how frequently you want to spend focused time? So we start by picking times that, in general, make sense for everyone. For example, if it's around focused, productive time, in the morning. We obviously look at what's in your calendar already, because we wouldn't be helping you if we scheduled time over an existing meeting. And then the system learns over time. So, for example, if we scheduled every Tuesday at 6 p.m. for you to go running, and you always check that off as done, we know it works for you, and we'll keep scheduling it then. But on the other hand, if we put productive time for coding into your calendar every Wednesday morning, and you keep moving it to Tuesday and Thursday, then we'll learn that Wednesday isn't good and start scheduling it on the other days. Now, we designed goals to work with a broad range of different types. Exercise is very, very popular, but we also see quite a lot of people using it for work-centric goals, like having a daily block for planning in the calendar or focus time like the coding example you can see here. So this sort of takes the effort out of doing the scheduling, so you don't have to do it manually. Does it still have the desired effect of getting you to commit more? And it turns out that yes, it does, I'm pleased to say. So last summer, after we launched, we ran an 8-week, 95-participant study with people using this feature. And by the end of it, 74% said that it was helping them to meet their goals. And perhaps more importantly, on average, participants were spending 30% more time on their goals at the end of the study than they were at the beginning. And we also saw a big increase in the actual amount of time people were spending. So as you can see from this chart, there was a 100% increase in the number of participants who were spending 4 or more hours a week on what they described as their most important goal. So great, we think it works. Okay, so let's move on to the future. I've just taken you through some of the things that are in the product today. You can use it right now. I now want to take you through some explorations, how we're thinking about improving the product in the future. Now, we're really excited about these ideas. We're excited to tell you about them. We'd love to get feedback from you. But please remember, they're explorations. They're not committed features. So they might not end up in the product in the form that you're about to see. They might not end up in the product at all. That caveat aside, let's have a look at what we're thinking about for email. So, priority inbox and tabbed inbox are good at getting rid of the clutter. But for very busy email inboxes, there's still a lot of emails in there, and it's hard for people to know which email to look at first. So The highlights exploration, which you can see here, builds on priority inbox by more accurately elevating the most important and urgent emails. And it does this by using NLP to actually look at what is the content of the email. And so, for example, it could elevate an email where someone has requested a response today, particularly if that's also someone that we know is important to you. And in addition to that, it actually shows a rationale, which you can see in gray above each email, explaining why we've elevated that. So you can more easily make a decision about whether you want to act on that email now or later. And working together with this, we have a second exploration, the limited notifications exploration. And this is about getting fewer interruptions by only being notified when those most important emails arrive. And it's not just about looking at the most important emails, but it also takes your context into account. What are you doing? So if you're in a meeting, for example, or if it's outside your normal working hours, then the threshold, the bar for actually buzzing your phone is going to be higher than if you're at work and not doing anything in particular. Changing tack slightly. So we talked about snooze and how snooze could help you make sure that you didn't drop the ball and forget to reply. But snooze is kind of manual. You still have to actually decide when you're going to snooze that email to and that you want to snooze that email. So in this exploration, again, we use NLP to automatically detect which emails are requesting a response from you or where you have requested a response in an email you've sent. And if there's been no response in either direction for a certain period of time, we'll bump those to the top of your inbox, again telling you, hey, you haven't replied for 3 days, or perhaps you want to follow this up because the other person hasn't replied for some amount of time. Okay, so let's go back to calendar. So we've talked a lot about the fact that we're bad at saying no. So what if calendar said no so that you didn't have to? So in this exploration, we've been thinking about what if we let users specify a limit on how much time they want to spend on meetings each week. 15 hours in this case. Essentially taking that pie chart of time use that Jacob was talking about and making it an integral part of the product. So what could we do? Well, essentially we could change the scheduling environment, not for you, but for all of your colleagues who try to schedule time with you. So if they try and set up a meeting with you that would violate your limits, we can push back before that invite has gone out. And we can actually tell them that, hey, there's a cost of scheduling with you, right, because you're busy. And we can provide a low-friction way out by suggesting times, you can see that here in the middle screenshot, where you're both available, where you've both got time, where you're not violating the limits. And if they really want to have that meeting with you anyway, because maybe it is urgent, we nudge them into actually justifying themselves to you, rather than just sending an anonymous invite and leaving all the work of saying no and justifying not going to you. Okay. Finally, we thought about what would goals look like if it was focused on making sure that you were allocating enough focused time to do productive work. And so we thought about a couple of things in this exploration. Obviously, we've talked a lot about making sure that time is scheduled in the morning and making sure we get other things out of the way so you can have your focus time in the morning. We looked at having a do not disturb mode that could be even more aggressive at getting rid of disruptions, like, for example, stopping Hangouts, chat notifications from happening. In addition, when we talk to people who currently block out time manually on calendar for Make Time Today or use the goals feature, a common complaint was that their colleagues ignore the block. They say, oh, it's a work block. I can schedule over that because they're not in a meeting. So again, we want to change the scheduling environment. So we're calling out the fact that you're going to interrupt someone, that there's a cost to doing that, and here are some times which are more appropriate for having a meeting rather than doing focused work. Okay, so that's some of the ways we're thinking about changing Gmail and calendar in the future. I hope this has been interesting and a good use of your time. In conclusion, we think that when it comes to managing your time better, the environment is key. So if you only remember 3 things from today, this is what we'd recommend. First of all, use the Google Mail and Calendar clients on your phone and your laptop, as well as on phone and tablet, as well as on the laptop. It will help you today, and it's going to help you even more in the future. Secondly, unless your role at work is entirely reactive, block out a healthy dose of make time in the calendar in the mornings so that you can get productive work done. And tell your colleagues, because if you all respect each other's make time, you're all going to be more effective and more productive. So with that, good luck with your time management. Thank you very much for listening.